Luma Mufla, a young Jordanian woman educated in the United States and working as a coach for private youth soccer teams in Atlanta, was out for a drive one day and ended up in Clarkston, Georgia. She was pleasantly surprised by the ethnic restaurants and by the sight of women wearing the hijab. Most of all, she was amazed and delighted to see young boys, black and brown and white, some barefoot, playing soccer on every flat surface they could find. Luma decided to quit her job, move to Clarkston, and start a soccer team. This was where she needed to be, and this was where she would make a huge difference in the lives of the Fugees and the small southern town they came to call home. For First Chapter Friday, here is a look at Outcasts United, the story of a refugee soccer team that changed a town, by Warren St. John. On a cool spring afternoon on a soccer field in northern Georgia, two teams of teenage boys were going through their pregame warm-ups. The field was quiet except for the thumping of soccer balls against 4 feet and the rustling of the balls against the nylon nets hanging from the goals. Suddenly there was a rumble. As it grew louder, all motion stopped and boys from both teams looked skyward. Above was a squadron of fighter jets on their way to an air show miles away in Atlanta. The aircraft came closer so that the boys could make out the markings on the wings and the white helmets of the pilots in the cockpits. Then, with a roar loud enough to rattle the change in a person's pockets, the jets shot off in different directions like an exploding firework. The teams watched with craned necks. The players on the home team, a group of 13 and 14-year-old boys from the nearby Atlanta suburbs playing with the North Atlanta Soccer Association, gestured toward the sky with awe. The boys at the other end of the field were members of an all-refugee soccer team called the Fugees. Many had actually seen fighter jets in action, and all had felt the results of war firsthand. There were Sudanese players on the team whose villages had been bombed, and Liberians who'd lived through mortar fire that pierced the roofs of their neighbors' homes, taking out whole families. As the jets flew over the field, several members of the Fugees flinched. "You guys need to concentrate," a voice interrupted as the jet streaked into the distance. The voice belonged to Luma Mufla, the 31-year-old founder and volunteer coach of the Fugees. Her players resumed their practice shots, but they seemed distracted. Their shots flew hopelessly over the goal. "If you shoot like that, you're going to lose," Coach Luma said. Luma shouted to her players to gather around her. She gave them their positions, and they took the field. 40 or so parents had gathered on the home team's sideline to cheer their boys on, and they clapped as their sons walked onto the pitch. There was no one on the Fugees sideline. Most of the players came from single-parent families, and their mothers or fathers, usually mothers, stayed home on weekends to look after their other children or else worked, because weekend shifts paid more than weekday shifts. Few had cars to allow them to travel to soccer games. Even at their home games, the Fugees rarely had anyone to cheer them on. The referee summoned the Fugees to the line to go over their roster and to check their cleats and numbers. Luma handed him the roster, and the referee wrinkled his brow. "If I mispronounce your name, I apologize," he said. He read through the list. When he got hung up, the boys would politely say their own names, then step forward to declare their jersey numbers. A few minutes later, a whistle sounded and the game began. The head coach of the North Atlanta team liked to scream. From the outset, he ran back and forth on his sideline, barking at his players in a hoarse bellow. "Man on! Man on! Drop it! Drop it! Turn! Turn! Turn!" Luma paced silently on her side of the field with an annoyed look on her face. She was all for teaching, but her method was to teach during practice and during the breaks in play. Once the whistle blew, she allowed her players to be themselves, to screw up, to take chances. All the shouting was wearing on her nerves. When North Atlanta scored first on a free kick, the team's coach jumped up and down, while across the field, parents leaped from their folding lawn chairs in celebration. Luma pursed her lips in a tiny sign of disgust and kept pacing quietly. A few moments later, Christian Jackson of the Fugees shook himself free on the right side, dribbled downfield, and fired a line drive into the top right corner of the net. Goal! Luma betrayed no reaction other than to adjust her tattered white Smith College baseball cap. She continued to pace. The Fugees soon controlled the ball again, making crisp passes and moving within range of the goal. A Fugees forward struggled free of traffic to take a shot that flew a good 20 feet over the crossbar and into the parking lot behind the field. Luma paced. Meanwhile, with each of his team's shots, the North Atlanta coach shouted more commands. He was getting upset. He obviously believed that if his players had done as he said, they could have scored on Manchester United. But as it was, they ended the first half trailing the Fugees 3-1. A 3-1 lead at halftime would have pleased most soccer coaches, but Luma was not pleased. Her head down, she marched angrily to a corner of the field, the Fugees following. They could tell she was unhappy. They knew what was coming. Luma ordered them to sit down. Our team has taken 9 shots and made 3. They've taken 2 shots and made 1, she told the boys, her voice sharp. You're outrunning them, out-hustling them, outplaying them. Why are you only winning 3-1? Christian, she said, looking at the boy who sat on the grass with his arms around his knees, this is one of your worst games. I want it to be one of your best games. I want to sit back and watch good soccer. Do you understand? At that moment, the voice of the North Atlanta coach, still screaming at his players, drifted down the field to the Fugees' huddle. Luma turned her gaze toward the source of the offending noise. See that coach? She said. I want him to sit down and be quiet. That's when you know we've won, when he sits down and shuts up. Got it? Yes, coach, her players replied. When the Fugees took the field for the second half, they had changed. They quickly scored 3 goals. The first, an elegant cross, was chested in by a Sudanese forward named Atak. That was followed by a cannon shot from Christian, 10 yards out. Moments later, Christian dribbled into the box and faked to his left, a move that left the North Atlanta goalie tangled in his own limbs. Before shooting right, another goal. The opposing coach was still yelling, man on, man on. So the Fugees kept shooting. Another goal, and another. When the angry North Atlanta players started hacking away at the Fugees' shins and ankles, the Fugees brushed them off and scored yet again. At 8-2, the North Atlanta coach, hoarse now, wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, quietly wandered over to his bench, and sat down. The Fugees tried to stifle their smiles. If Luma was satisfied, it was hard to tell. She remained perfectly stone-faced. The referee blew his whistle 3 times to signal the end of the game. The final score was 9-2 Fugees. Christian Jackson had scored 5 goals. The teams shook hands, and the Fugees quickly ran to the bench for water and oranges, which awaited them in 2 white plastic grocery bags. A few moments later, the referee approached. He looked to be in his late 50s, white, with a gray mustache. He asked Luma if he could say something to her players. Luma didn't like handing over her team's attention to anyone, especially not to a stranger. But she got her team together in front of the referee some 10 yards from their bench. "Gentlemen," he said, "I'd like to thank you. You played the ball the entire game, and you didn't take any cheap shots. They got frustrated and started hacking, and you didn't retaliate. So, I'd like to commend you on your sportsmanship." The man paused and swallowed hard. "And that was one of the most beautiful games of soccer I've ever seen played." And this has been a preview of Outcasts United by Warren St. John.